Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's learning call on the Swedish Climate Assembly. It's been a while since we've run a learning call, but really delighted to have this as our subject. There are a couple of reasons why we're really interested in the Swedish Assembly. One is it was actually run independently of government. It was part of a research project, FAIRTRANS, but was really focused on trying to affect and influence public debate around climate, and particularly transportation. We'll talk about that a bit more. And also a lot of the people involved in organising it were very interested in how you might think about integrating systems thinking. And those of you who follow Knoca events will remember that we actually had a event a few months ago before the assembly started where we were talking about what that might mean for assemblies. Just to say, we've got as ever the call is being recorded. Very happy. Please throw in any questions or any thoughts you have in the chat as we go along. Some of them may be answered there and then, or we'll bring them into the conversation. And just to say, we're also trying out an AI assistant, which I'm personally extremely nervous about, but we've got to try these things. So it might try and summarize things at various points, and we have absolutely no control over that. And it may be something that we use in the future, but this is a test pilot. So we're going to be joined by 4 people today. Tim Dorr, who is Associate Professor at the Stockholm Resilience Centre at Stockholm University, and he was the lead organiser of the assembly. We'll be joined then by Sofia Bernett, who's also at Stockholm Resilience Centre, and she was the communications lead for the project. We'll then hear from Jenny Larsson. It's always lovely to hear from an assembly member directly. And finally, we'll be joined by Mattias Goldmann, who is CEO and founder of the 2030 Secretariat, which looks at the delivery of the climate target, particularly for transportation. He'll give us a more independent view. So hopefully from those different participants, we'll actually have different perspectives on the effectiveness and otherwise of different parts of the assembly process. And if you have any questions, just throw them into the chat. Just a quick background. I've already mentioned that this was part of a research project. It's the Assembly's key remit was to answer the question how Sweden can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the Paris Agreement, with a particular focus on transportation. This is in light of a sort of changing political climate in Sweden, particularly where climate is becoming much more of a conflictual issue. It had 60 members who were selected through a democratic lottery process, as most assemblies are, and took place over 2 weekends and 5 evenings between March and May 2024. And if you go on the website, you can see you can download the report. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's only in Swedish, but I'm lobbying for an English version of it as soon as possible. So what I'd like to do is to bring Tim into the space to join me, if possible. As I say, Tim was the lead for this project. And Tim, you've actually joined a very small group of people who have actually run assemblies. There aren't actually that many of us, and I don't know if you've been sent the badge yet, but there's a whole club and everything of people who've been through this traumatic process. So looking back at it, how do you feel about the process? Do you feel it was a success? How was it as trying to lead this kind of project? So just giving you that moment of sort of therapy.
Thank you very much, Graham. I think it is probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life, and it was a tremendous opportunity, and I sort of found myself in a position, being brought into a project, having worked a little bit on trying to get deliberative mini publics up and running in Sweden, where we decided to run a climate assembly. And I often said that during the process, I felt like I was waking up flying a plane. So I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. I'm flying my plane. And oh my God, I'm flying a plane. How are we going to land this thing? So yeah, lots of different experiences and emotions, very rich experience. And of course, like any super complex process with lots of different stakeholders, quite high stakes, quite high profile. The more we succeeded through Sofia's work in getting a lot of media attention, the more it felt like it was kind of high stakes as well. So yeah, kind of interesting, complex processes with, although we had a clear kind of objective, a written objective for what we wanted to achieve. Within that, I think there's always different emphasis that are always negotiated amongst the different parties involved in the project. So I think that's also part of the journey. And I think, yeah, overall, I think it was, I feel like it was a success. We ran an assembly, we had a very good recruitment. We got a lot of media coverage. We had some really interesting conversations. We facilitated really interesting conversations amongst the members who generated a really interesting raft of recommendations, which were also widely publicized. And we will see. In terms of success, in terms of impact, of course, it's still early days.
Very early.
This finished in May. And tomorrow we will be going with a few of the members to the Parliament. There's a parliamentary seminar there tomorrow where we'll share some more of the information. And then we'll have a legal seminar in December where some legal scholars will look through the recommendations and sort of analyze them from a sort of policy legislation perspective.
So it's kind of, you mentioned that, you mentioned tomorrow's meeting. It's kind of interesting because you didn't organize this with primarily, you organized this independently. You didn't have buy-in from government or parliament necessarily. So you've had some interest then from politicians in the process.
Yeah, yeah. This wasn't mandated by any government decision. This was something that the research project FAIRTRANS independently decided to initiate. But I mean, we started communication with parliamentarians at the start. We let them know in October last year that we also had some semi-political figures on our consultation group. So we tried to have a broad range of people on a consultation group, including mostly former politicians,
right.
One sitting politician, and also some people in the public life from a political standpoint. So there was always that connection. Yeah, and then
okay.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, and maybe with Sophia I can pick up some of that. One of the things that I mentioned at the start, and I know it's particular interest of yours, is around this issue of systems thinking. And I know back in a year ago or so, you were thinking really hard about how you could integrate some of the things some of those ideas around systems thinking into an assembly space. I know also, this wasn't a huge amount of time you had. It was, I guess, almost equivalent to sort of 3 weekends, I guess, in total, if you had all the time together. So I'm kind of interested to know how did you get on with that sort of attempt to integrate your insights around system thinking into this sort of participatory technology? And do you think what worked, what didn't work, what compromises did you have to make?
Sure, yeah. So my name is coming from the Stockholm Resilience Centre, where we put a lot of emphasis on systems thinking, and I've previously been involved in my earlier research career using participatory modeling and different sort of stakeholder and local stakeholder settings. Yeah, we were interested in these ideas and also inspired by the work by Claire Mellier and colleagues, and Claire was one of our advisors as well. We were interested in this challenge of how do you support more systems thinking. And we approached that in a number of ways, and we sort of tried out and explored lots of different issues, as we did partly with the Knoca community, which was great. And I would say when it came down to it, the key things we did was we had this dilemma of whether we have a very concrete issue, go straight into transportation, or whether we have a broader remit which allows people to make broader connections and not become too technical transport focused, and think about the bigger connections in the system, political connections, power relationships, how the money flows around, trade-offs between one sector and another. So the kind of compromise that we ended up making there was to have the first weekend focused broadly on climate policy, climate change, climate policy, and then the subsequent witnesses we selected to give an overview of emissions from Swedish transportation and the options there. And then we had some witnesses who were, the members themselves deliberated for one evening and chose their own witnesses. And I just quickly say on that point, if I was to do it again, I would have many fewer witnesses and hand over the selection of witnesses to the members much earlier, because there were so many interesting suggestions that came up. Lots of things that we ourselves had agonized over in terms of the selection of witnesses. I think they really were able to solve for themselves. So I think that's one key learning. And that was supposed to allow this sort of compromise between saying, well, transportation is very important. It's a good topic. It's a third of Sweden's emissions. It's very politically contested. And of course, every citizen has a different experience of it and is affected by measures in a different way, depending on your mode of transport and where you live and whether you've got kids, etc. So for that reason, it was a kind of obvious choice. And we did discuss a lot, deliberate a lot within the planning group of whether we should allow the members to choose the area. But then we thought there was so many good reasons for transportation why it was an appropriate topic that we should save the time and allow them to go forward with that. So that was the kind of framing.
Were there particular tech? So I completely understand the sort of compromise between trying to think systemically and think about it as an issue and then actually coming down to recommendations in a particular area. Were there particular techniques you tried to use to sort of to encourage that systems thinking? I think, if I remember rightly, you used fresk and things like that.
Exactly.
So I mean, know what your experience was.
Yeah, so that's the most concrete thing that we did. We used this interactive game, Climate Fresk, and it was and we looked into using other kind of linking to other climate modeling systems that we had available, and colleagues who had different types of soft modeling approaches, participatory modeling approaches. In the end, I think the time was too short and the stakes were too high, and the diversity of views of how appropriate that kind of very structured approach would be meant that we didn't really invest a lot in that. But we did take 3 hours during the first weekend to play Climate Fresk and have a follow-up session from it. So it's a card game that people play in a small group, and we found it worked really well because people are basically teaching each other and learning about the IPCC science. And I'd be interested to see what Jenny thinks about it. But anecdotally and according to the surveys, it was highly appreciated and it seemed to develop a nice dynamic. But it did take away 3 hours from other opportunities for deliberation.
But it's kind of nice, isn't it? Then I mean, it's a really interesting that if you do that early rather than having a bunch of talking heads who come in and talk about the challenges of climate and try actually to do it practically and learn together. My guess is as much was developed, that shared learning, but also learning to work together strikes me as a really interesting as a really interesting kind of like insight. Not to necessarily start with all those kind of like scientists kind of like one after the other telling everybody how bad it is and how this is all interconnected, etc.
We had it on the Sunday because it was thought that the members wanted to land and build up their connection before they engage with this rather science-based exercise. So there was some talks before it. But talking to some of the members about this, it's interesting because Climate Fresk was, as an observer, having designed, I was on fly on the wall observer, and we had observer teams. It didn't come up in any deliberations really that I heard in terms of the small group sessions, but it was in the survey. The members ranked it very highly as being useful and influential. So it was a bit of a paradox there. And talking to the members, a few of the members about it, there is something more about this. It's not so much the content of what was learned there, but this learning together and thinking about how things are connected, sort of informed the way that people work together going forward in a positive.
I think it's really interesting. There's a difference between telling people that's the case and them actually working that out out and through together. I think is a really important learning. So what happens next? I guess you've talked a bit about what's happening tomorrow with the politicians and with lawyers. What do you think? Have you got any sense as to how this has resonated in terms of? Do you think this is that this might be the start of an interest in assemblies more generally, or do you think that hasn't landed, that it hasn't landed in that way, or you just don't know at the moment, I guess?
Well, a little bit we don't know, and we are carrying out, so as it's part of a research project, we are carrying out research on that, and so we're planning a public survey shortly to see both people's awareness of it, but also experimentally giving people different pieces of information and seeing how they take it up. So in terms of the impact on the aim was to enrich the public debate. And certainly we made a lot of noise. There was the coverage that we got was beyond expected. But I think to know whether we enrich the public debate in a deliberative way is still an open and interesting question. I mean, certainly there are some people who are really for more ambitious climate action, jumped on and supported us very strongly and joined our social media. And then there was a whole community on X who wanted to dismiss the process and undermine it in various ways. So did it help us to move into a more deliberative direction, or was it just used as a tool by one side to the other? I think we still need to do research on that, which is super interesting.
And can I just say, it's actually really nice that there is going to be research on that, because so many assemblies, I mean, you could argue, oh, researchers are running this, it's not going to be politically significant. Of course, you've worked in order to do that, but actually this is part of a research program to understand that, which I think is going to be incredibly useful and vital for us as a community.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the other question you asked was about climate assemblies or deliberative mini publics in Sweden. Very little experience or experimentation. Just a few cases. Digidem Lab actually ran the first National Assembly a year before about sustainable food, but that was a real outlier. It's a real experiment by by the food agency. And certainly we got a lot of coverage, and a lot of the questions that we had from media was about the process. A lot of interest was in the process. And I think that, I mean, that was happening anyway. So there are now climate assemblies popping up all around the country at the local level, at regional level on different topics. And I think we've contributed to the deliberative wave sort of splashing against the shore of Sweden finally. But I think it was happening anyway. There are other processes going on, but I think it definitely, because it ended up being quite high profile, it sort of put the idea of deliberating with random citizens a little bit more on the map and generated a lot of discussion, enthusiasm, but also skepticism.
So my last question for the moment then for you, and it's my favorite question. If you could change one thing about what happened, and it isn't, the answer isn't, I wish I had more time. Maybe that is a good answer, actually. That is what everyone says. But what would you change what would it be? What would you, looking back, what would you do differently?
I mean, I had a few answers to this, and the one was about time, more time for co-design. I think that was unfortunately rushed. The time we would have liked to have had Digidem procured earlier, so we could have had more time to collaborate on that. In terms of the actual process, I think there's interesting trade-offs about having a completely bottom-up design, deliberate, the members really writing their own recommendations from scratch, which means that the recommendations have a lot of authenticity.
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of helping the members to start standing on the shoulders of giants in a way and giving them some suggestions that are already in the policy domain and asking them to critique it from a certain perspective, like was done in the Finnish Assembly, for example. So I think, I mean, you never know how it would have worked, but sometimes I think that might have been a good way to make good use of the members' time. But it wasn't super, we asked that question in the final survey, and it wasn't super popular suggestion amongst the members, so I'm not sure it is right.
Yeah, my sense of having talked to and done a learning call with the Finnish is I think it has a very different vibe when you ask people to comment on existing proposals. I think I think the thing we really need to work on as a community is make sure that as people are building their proposals, they're kind of aware of what's already there rather than kind of inventing things. And that's our challenge, because I think being a policy appraisal process is to me has a different dynamic. And actually the citizens tend to be more negative, I think, about proposals that are coming from elsewhere rather than things so it's a kind of interesting problem, that one. But not
I think we probably could have provided, if we designed it and had more time we probably could have provided more feedback or more connection to in the latter stages so the members could have
I think that's actually emerging practice now. I've seen it in a couple of assemblies where they have that feedback from public officials and from stakeholders. I know the French one recently, they actually had a couple of stakeholder sessions where they were doing joint work. And I think maybe that's where, maybe that's the kind of place we need to be going towards. Listen, that was so interesting. I'm going to throw you out, and I'm going to pull you back in towards the end of the call. Can I just say, he's gone already. I just wanted to say how much I admire anyone who takes on this kind of work, because as Tim says, it is such a challenge, and I can imagine it just took over his world for a few months. So at this point, I'd really pleased to bring in Sofia, who's already been name checked a couple of times by Tim. So Sofia, you were responsible for communication. Yes. And that meant there was quite a lot on your shoulders, because you weren't commissioned by government. You're a project that's being developed by a research institute. Research institutes aren't famous for their capacity to communicate. So I'm kind of interested to know, can you tell us a little bit about your strategy that you adopted? Because I know from the very start, communication was really, I was on the advisory board, and communication was something that was always being talked about. So before, during, after, what for you were the key elements of your communication?
Yeah, I was going to say we learned from you that
well, not from me personally.
No, but from the Knoca sort of context, that we really need to have an early onset of the media coverage to get an interest of a continuous interest from the media and the public for the whole process and the results. So, and since we didn't have a political mandate, communications was, as you said, a key purpose in itself. And since the end goal was to promote a more informed and nuanced public debate, our comm strategy was based on delivering towards that goal. And the pillars, I would say, besides the fact that we needed the early, time was of the essence, we needed early interest. It was to support and promote the members themselves as spokespeople to the media. Besides the researchers behind the project, and really build their confidence to speak about their experiences and their insights. And I was very pleased and also surprised, I must say, how many members were willing. There were more than I would have hoped or thought there would be. Jenny was one of them, so thank you, Jenny, and many others. So they were there for the two press conferences that we held in the beginning and in the end of the process when the proposals were presented. And also, of course,
can I just ask, for you, there's an authenticity about citizens speaking about their own work. Do you also think it cuts through in a way that do you think citizens speaking of hearing citizens talk about their work actually cuts through in a way that perhaps other voices don't?
Yes, I really do. There's sort of an identification factor that people can. This is the assembly mirrored the Swedish society as far as we could with 60 people. So of course there were people that many Swedes could identify with, many voices that were heard that perhaps aren't usually heard. So yes, definitely.
And you also, as I understand it, I'm sorry, I've stopped you mid conversation, but talk. But I understand. So you were kind of centering the citizens, but I also understand you also had quite an important role for well-known people who are well-known amongst the public who were around the assembly in different ways. Can you tell us a bit about their role in how they helped enable your communication?
Yes, it didn't hurt to have two well-known people as mentors to the assembly. So they were there and sort of were these trusted and well-liked in Swedish society voices. One of them being Sverker Sörlin, who's a professor and researcher and who's held public sort of radio broadcasting talks and is a famous also author in Sweden. And one was Carolina Klüft, who's an Olympian athlete. It's also quite well known. So they really helped. They were also there for the press conferences and were also spokespeople of the initiative and helped us create an interest from the beginning. So we're very, very grateful to them.
And what do you think? I mean, looking back at the different moments of communication, what do you think worked best? I mean, you've talked about having the voice of the citizens. You've talked about this. How did that actually work in practice at particular moments? Either, I don't know, at the start of the assembly or when recommendations were released, or how did your so I'm not articulating this. What were the sort of peak moments for you in terms of communication where you really got cut through?
I think the peak moments were to get that early interest from sort of big media outlets, like really national key media that are well known, that reach many people.
And so how did you do that? Did you actually invite them in? Did you come
Sorry,
talk
I
to
can't
them, or
tell
did you just?
no, but yeah, no, yeah, it's hard strategic communications work. Like writing a good press release. I mean, sometimes it's that, I mean, that's really a key.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then just contacting key journalists that we thought would be interested in this, and just really trying to get that call with them to explain the importance of this and the potential. And Tim really did such a great job you're so engaged, Tim, in this topic and know a lot about it. So just really explaining the potential. And the reporter who covered this for Swedish national television, she had also covered another international or another national citizens assembly. So she knew the potential of these kinds of initiatives and was interested in also having exclusivity. Yeah,
And did you give her that exclusivity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think that was a problem or not?
I don't think it's a problem. It was a problem because we didn't want. I mean, we really wanted the members to have their the process that was not interrupted or disturbed in any way by the media. So we were very clear when, okay, so now we have media present, and we were super clear that media couldn't listen to the discussions, the deliberations, and so on. And it was, of course, so very voluntary to speak to the media. But it was just very good to establish that sort of trust also. And we had the reporter on a Zoom call actually on the first weekend that the assembly met, to introduce herself and explaining why she wanted to cover this and so on. So just establishing that relationship between the members and the reporter who would be covering this, and you know, the media ethics of it all. And so
that's really interesting. In Ireland, they actually had someone from RTE, which is their national broadcasting, who kind of like followed the process. The other thing they did was they tried to embed a couple of TikTok influencers. I just wondered what was your strategy on social media? Because obviously there's a kind of, many of us, particularly my age, I'll give my age, are much more used to working with sort of traditional media. But did you have a specific strategy for social media? And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah, we wanted to be sort of establishing a strong presence on social media. So we posted the experts' lectures on YouTube. So YouTube was an important channel for us. And we were present on LinkedIn, we still are, and Instagram and Facebook. So we had to choose, because there's so many platforms to choose between, but we had to choose sort of resource manage wise. But I still feel, I know, I mean, if I'm going to say something that we could have actually worked more on, or in terms of like what did we need more of, it would have been more resources to establish that dialogue that we were after on social media, because it's very hard to sort of encourage dialogue and then not be a part of it yourself. Yes. And it takes a lot of time to moderate. Yes. And also know-how. And you have to also, we can't like just outsource that to anyone. So there had to be researchers engaged and people who knew about climate and so on. So yeah, I would.
I think we underestimate the work it takes to do good social media strategy,
Yes.
actually. And I think you're right. And being present, because you've got to be very responsive, haven't you, as well? Otherwise you lose,
Yes.
you've lost it, if you spend time off it. So yeah, I completely see that. Can you give us a sense? Wait, I just should have asked you at the start. Can you give us a sense of the kind of media activity that there was around it, in terms of, kind of TV, in terms of radio, in terms of social media, in terms of newspapers? What are the sort of highlights for you?
Well, I think the highlights was before the assembly started, where we communicated that, okay, we're doing this initiative. Sweden, one of Sweden's largest national newspapers, covered it and did an interview with Tim. So that was like the first highlight. And then it was the fact that Swedish national television wanted to cover the assembly. And the features that they broadcasted in the start, and also the sort of video journals that they broadcasted with some of the members, and did really just like portraits of actual members and try to sort of reflect the polarization, but also in a very like human. Not to like doing it in a stereotypical way, but like really getting through with the message of like we're all human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And we have so many things going on in our lives, and climate may or may not be something that we care deeply about, or have the sort of the headspace, or just the actual space in our lives to engage ourselves in.
I'm really quite surprised. I don't want to sound I don't believe it, but it's really interesting that a lot of us our experience of the media is they're sort of take an interest, move on kind of thing. So I'm kind of interested that there was this sort of in-depth engagement. And do you have any sense as to why they actually did embrace it in this way?
That's a really good question. Actually, these are just like my own thoughts. I think, or like from a lot of the reactions that I personally got on my social media when I shared this and talked about this, is that finally there's something positive. There's something like uniting. There's something that like a factor weighing against the polarization that we're all experiencing, the really like harsh climate on social media when discussing climate on climate, so to speak. So I think people were so starved for this, like, okay, positive climate news. Like people can come together. People can discuss something that it's hard to agree on and reach some sort of conclusion or agreement. So just a positive notion of this initiative.
Okay. So was that you feel there was a climate for that kind of for that kind of news, basically?
Yes.
Which that's interesting. That's really interesting. So if I was to ask you, if I'm coming to you, and I can imagine after this call, lots of people will be coming to you and saying, okay, what lessons should we learn for integrating communications into our assembly? What would you, apart from the answer, which would be give me a big budget?
Yeah,
give me a bigger
That's
budget.
number one. So clear that away.
So what would be the sort of key guidance you would offer others?
Just encourage the members, I would say, because we also did we did the communications department at Stockholm Resilience Centre, where I'm fortunate to work, are highly professional comms specialists who also helped me to like really reach out to all the local newspapers that could be interested in doing features with local members. Like identify, okay, so we have potential members in this region that could be interested to speak to local media. So that was yeah, I think that was really key to promote the members themselves.
It was very interesting. I know in
for...
Austria they made a lot of the regional connections of members to the regional media and things like that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But kind of like you've got a member, and it kind of it's a lot of local newspapers and things ran with that. Yeah.
It's one of your own here. Like
yeah,
speak to that person. So yeah, that was advice I would pay forward.
And if there was one thing you told them not to do, what would it be? That's a harder one.
Try to control the process, the communications too much. Like be ready for anything, and because promoting the members also means that you have to let go of. I mean, they have to be authentic and transparent. And transparent. If they have criticism of the process, we welcome that, and sort of just let go of that.
It's kind of hard for comms people sometimes to let go of that.
Yes. This was decided like in dialogue with Tim and me, because I'm more traditional and wanting to keep control of stuff.
Okay, so this is a lesson you've learned, is it?
Yes.
Okay, that's
very much so.
That's really interesting. Listen, that's really helpful. Thanks so much. And Sofia, congratulations on the work you've done. It sounds I think we've got a lot to learn from your experience. And I think actually you as a comms person talking to other comms people about what this was like as an experience will be incredibly useful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I can just second what Tim says, that it's been the most fun project I've ever worked with. So I feel just so grateful and fortunate to.
What I normally get, when we talk to people, also public officials, etc., who do this work, they say it was one of the hardest, with a big frown. They say it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I wouldn't not.
Well, that too. Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. That's really fantastic. And I didn't pay you to say that, did I? So that's good.
No, free of charge. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll pull you back in a second, Sophie, when we have a panel discussion. So my third guest has been mentioned a couple of times. Is one of the members is Jenny Larsson. I don't know, Jenny, if you can join me. So we've been talking. You are one of another. I said to Tim and to Sophia that they're one of a small group of people who have organised assemblies. You're one of, you now join a slightly larger group, but not very many people have actually been through an assembly process. So people like me spend a lot of time talking about assemblies, but someone like you actually has the direct experience of doing it. So tell me, it's such a big question, but what was the experience like?
Oh, wow. How much time do I have?
You have exactly 2 minutes.
Very kind. No, but I've been pondering on that question and wondering how to respond. But I think it's been really overwhelming, but it's been one of the best experiences I've ever taken part of, because, I mean, it's weird because you get thrown into this like big bubble where all kinds of things happens at once, and you try to like navigate through everything from facts to, okay, we're supposed to go downstairs and listen to experts, and now we're doing this, and now we're writing recommendations. It's been crazy, and I'm trying to like remember what the experience was like, and that was pretty much it. It was crazy, but one of the best things I've ever experienced, actually. It was very, very good in so many ways.
Can I ask you, what did you feel about when you actually received the invitation? Because it's kind of like people look at it. I hear so many different responses. I'm kind of interested to know what was your response when you saw the invite.
Well, I saw it, but I didn't really look at it well enough. But then I think I saw something in the news in regards to climate, and I was like, oh, I got something in the mail. Maybe I should check out what that was. And then I read through it, and I was like, okay, this is something I want to join in on. So yeah.
So actually, some of the things I was talking about with the comms actually made you look at the invitation. That's really good. That's really good.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it was just something in regards to climate, because I've been like, it's everywhere in the news. So, but then I remember reading through it just not thoroughly, but I remember something. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go check that out again and see what that was about. And then I read through it and saw that that was something that I really want to try to participate in if I were to be selected to
Who
do
would
so.
be selected? Yeah, okay, that's great. And so actually, you were quite excited when it actually happened. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I considered it my civic duty to actually join in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people receive the invitation and think it's a scam because they see they're being asked to do something and they're being offered some money and going to a hotel and things. And so it's interesting. Some people initially are really nervous about it. So it's nice to hear the positive story about that.
Yeah, well, I didn't even realize that I was going to get any type of compensation for it. So that was completely irrelevant.
Okay, that's for some people, that's the reason they go. So I mean, different people for different things. That's really interesting. So Tim mentioned at one point, I wasn't going to ask this question, but Tim raised it which was that you actually, as a group, got to choose some of the people who are going to give evidence to you. Tim was saying perhaps we should have given them more control over that process. Do you think actually it would have been a good idea if you as a group had more say in what evidence you would hear, or do you think the balance was about right?
That's a really tough question. I think yes and no, because I think, of course, it's good to have assembly members' input to what type of evidence they want or need to hear. But at the same time, that might, I don't know, disrupt the flow of information, because that can be a bit partisan, I guess, in some fashion. And also, I mean, they've mentioned the times. that was the big thing, that we felt like we didn't have enough time to maybe, for each moment we would like more time. But then again, I think we did a pretty stellar job with the time we had. But
yeah.
I'm not so sure that it would have been.
So there's a balance. There's a balance to be made here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and it's also like, I think that's also putting more work into the assembly members' laps, that when we already have a lot of thing that needs to be processed and go into our thoughts, and all the information needs to like simmer down and land somewhere, and to be able to actually have to go to out of that box and think, okay, what information am I missing? Well, I don't know. I have no idea what information I'm missing. You tell me. But I understand the process, because that the democratic process of that, for us to actually be able to have a say in what evidence we want to dive a little bit deeper into. I think that's a really good thing for the process of democracy in this type of setting. Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't the shortest process, but you didn't have a huge amount of time. So maybe if you'd had a longer process, maybe there could have been more of that. I'm interested in about the sort of generation of recommendations. How did you work together to actually generate recommendations, and what did that process look like? Because you didn't have a huge amount of time.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm just no, but oh wow. Well, it was actually we were waiting to be able to start to write our recommendations. It was like, okay, when are we going to get started? Come on, because it was like a big process to get there. But I think that process was so important, so we had something to actually stand on, or like, yeah. And then it was quite clear, because we had been given a lot of really solid evidence, and it was easier to actually sort out what type of recommendations we wanted to work on. And I think that was also a good part of it, that we got to decide a little bit for ourselves, to get like, this is from me, Jenny, this is important to me, so this is what I want to work on. Is there someone else in the group that are interested to work on that as well? Yeah, there's 4 of us. Okay. And then we could really put our own stamp on it. Or
did you then sense check those as you were generating the recommendations? Did you sense check them with other members, or was it a matter of, here's our recommendation, do you support it or not?
No, we actually, because that was, if I remember it correctly, we started off and then we could actually jump in into their process. We were so engaged in ours, so I didn't have time to do that. But we had other members come into our group to put their thoughts and inputs into it. Not changing anything, but might maybe add a little like fine details to the recommendation. And so I think that was a good process because this whole thing was about multiple perspectives. And I think that was kind of what the feeling that I was left with was that was magical because I came into it knowing quite a bit, but I didn't have everyone else's perspective, so it didn't, what I knew or didn't know didn't really matter that much because the recommendations that we all worked on had to be passed by the assembly members as well, or accepted by, and then you have to actually really talk to people and try to understand, and most importantly, listen to other people to actually understand what they're coming from.
And I guess often people who you would not necessarily have met in your daily life.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, that's an exercise most of us don't have to go through most of the time.
No, that's and that was actually I've talked about that with my friends when I talked about this process, that okay, yeah, so they're from left to right, north to south, east to west, ages from, I don't know what the youngest member was and the oldest. It was all of us, and that it was actually so nice to see that it was easy to find common ground and work from there. And then we could actually have a civil conversation about our differences, because we found we could mirror each other in what we actually agreed on, and use that to actually move forward in our discussions and in our, when we were disagreeing with each other, which happened a bit, but we the process from start to finish actually helped us to push through those things, and I think this is something that I would like to see more of. These type of assemblies, because it's and the knowledge in the room, my God, I was really impressed by that as well. No one was an expert, but we all had a perspective, and
you all have different lived experience, don't you? So which you bring into the space. So that's really interesting. So how do you feel about those kind of critics who think that actually climate policy or other sorts of policy is not a place for citizens? This is a place where it really should be for experts, that there is no role for citizens in sort of dealing with the complexity and challenges of climate policy. Having gone through this, how do you react to that kind of criticism of saying this should be left to the specialists?
Well, what have they done so far? How far have we gotten along in the process? And I mean, no, but honestly, like, if you want change, are we going to leave that up to experts to do? Force people to change their habits, their thoughts? I don't think no, nobody wants to be forced into doing anything. And that was the experience for me, was, okay, you're inviting us, I'm bringing something to the table. I feel like I'm invited to actually give my input into something that's so critical. And that makes me feel like I'm a big person. Oh, they need me. I'm part of something. That's just simple human nature, that you want to feel needed. You want to feel important. You want to feel that sense of community with others. And that makes you motivated to actually do or push through changes that maybe you would normally do. So I think, and it's like simple democracy. Isn't that what we are supposed to do in the world? Democracy. And this is the finest version of that. according to me. I think that's it's really when actually when citizens get a say in certain things, and most of our elected officials are elected official by us, so we should be able to actually make sure that they work for us as well.
Okay. And that's really powerful. I just wanted to ask one other just final question about, which was raised from Sofia, about your experience of sort of engaging in communications about the Assembly. How have you felt? So you've had this amazing experience within the Assembly. How have you felt about trying to communicate that with others, whether that's through media, whether that's with friends and colleagues, etc.? Has that been a difficult process or something you've enjoyed doing?
Well, no, it's been a lot of fun being a part of it, but I also wish that it was, I know it's been picked up a lot of places, but how the world today, like today's news is yesterday's news in like 2 minutes, because it's such a fast paced. And I think this is too big of a question. It's supposed to be climate and all this stuff is supposed to be implemented in every decision made, no matter what it is, because it affects us all. So I feel it's been really fun to be part of, but I wish that I would have seen even more interest, more news, more I don't know, that more reporters would have talked to us. I wish they would have reached out a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean,
that's not on Sofia's part or anyone else. Has done a fantastic job. That's more like, how can we like have all the media pick this story up to actually, I don't know, for people to see that this actually is a good thing, and we have actually, 22 recommendations that were had a majority voted for them. So if we can do it, then we should be able to push that further up the system towards our elected.
I think it's a common frustration, isn't it? You do this amazing work and you spend this time, and it doesn't always get the response that is justified. And I think that's common. That's a common feeling. But can I just say how much respect and admiration I have for you and your fellow citizens. I think you've done a fantastic job, and the fact that you were one of the first times this has happened in Sweden, you are breaking down barriers by doing this. So thank you for that work. And at that point, I shall bring you back into the conversation again in a minute, but I'm going to move on to Mattias. Mattias Goldmann, as I said, is from the 2030 Secretariat. I just want to say he had no role in the Assembly as far as I'm aware. So Mattias is talking to us as an interested observer, someone who obviously has a lot of experience in the climate policy space, particularly around transportation, and so probably brings a lot of frustrations as well as his experience. So I'm kind of interested. This is something which is kind of quite relatively novel in Sweden, this kind of process. I'm kind of interested, as someone who's playing a role within the sort of climate governance community. What do you think of it? What do you think of its outcomes? Is it something that impresses you?
Yeah, just to clarify that you're absolutely right, Graham. We had no role in this, and I'm at a different venue, so I'm not even getting a cup of coffee for saying this. But I've been very impressed, first of all, with the process as such, and secondly, and for my work, perhaps even more importantly so, with the results. In the chat, for those of us who are listening in live, I put a link to our sort of response to the many different proposals, which we found tremendously useful. A lot of them were things that we had already thought of, but were, first of all, clarified to a level that we might not have thought of previously. But secondly, just feeling the level of support, also the way that that you showed the percentage of support within the group for each proposal was tremendously useful, because I think that I speak for many that when I say that sometimes it's frustrating, Graham, as you mentioned, but also sometimes a little bit lonely when you feel that you want transition to accelerate, certainly within the transport sector, certainly right now in Sweden, where emissions are actually going up quarter by quarter. And certainly when we look back to the COP meeting that just ended last Saturday, and where we again did discuss a lot of other things rather than emissions reductions and climate mitigation. So when we see that tremendous support from citizens, I also realized that I used to be a politician myself, and we are, or they, the elected politicians, are by no means experts. So when I speak to politicians about our proposals that we developed at the 2030 Secretariat, and I now can also show that this has a great backing by the public, by Swedes at large. It's tremendously helpful. And when I bring forward proposals that we might not even have dared to bring forward because we thought they might be too radical, and we see that in fact they have support of 60, 70, or even 80% of this group of people. Can
you give us an example of the kind of proposals that maybe weren't things that you would have been comfortable proposing and maybe changed your mind on?
Well, we like to divide our work. For those of us don't speak in Swedish, there's 3 words we like you to learn. It's bilen, bränslet, beteendet. The vehicles, the fuels, and the behavior. And pretty much everybody knows that the switch within transport involves the vehicles. You see immediately an electric vehicle in front of you, and the fuels, of course, are also going to be important. We need to move out of the fossil fuels. But when it comes to the behavioral switch, we often hear from the National Transport Agency or from the government itself that behavioral switch is hard. They tend to point at how little we, in fact, reduced our transport needs or wants during COVID. But right now, we're all gearing up, we're all zooming in on a Zoom meeting rather than meeting in person. We reduce our transport needs by 100%. And there's some fairly radical stuff in the proposals, especially when it comes to the behavioral switch. And the behavioral switch, of course, goes a lot faster. And time is of essence now, because we overslept when it came to reducing our climate impact. And it takes a long while to go from fossil powered cars to electric cars, for instance, because typically a car runs for 20 years. But the behavioral change can be done fairly quickly. And with the backing, solid backing that we got from the work that's been done here, I think we'll see that politicians will have more appetite for doing that. And in fact, we're going to follow up on your great work with a meeting with the transport department of the parliament in late January, where we're going to build upon the proposals that we had here, particularly within the sector of behavioral change.
So Mattias, I think you're clicking something on the table. I'm not sure whether it's a watch.
I am sorry. I got so excited, so I was clicking my pen. Yeah, stopping.
Keep
One of my colleagues was just saying, "Can you ask him to stop clicking?"
Keep my hands where you can see them.
Okay, so I'm just interested in the extent to which others in the climate policy world, how are they reacting or are they not reacting to this process? You know, colleagues who maybe have less, you're seeing this as an opportunity to take an agenda forward. I'm just wondering how other sort of specialists in this area are responding, people you talk to, the kind of conversations you have, to this way of doing policy work.
I think we see some experts that might feel that their expertise is sort of bypassed, but I think that is the exact wrong way of looking at it, because of course, once there's a proposal, it needs to be designed into law. We need to get the nitty-gritty right, and that is where the experts always come in, whether it's a proposal from parliament or from the local parliament, or whether it's in fact a proposal from the people. So I think the experts are still obviously going to be needed, and I think also we realized, and we heard early on in today's talk, that in fact experts have also been consulted prior to these proposals being developed. So the experts' role is not diminished. If anything, experts need momentum and change, because if we just stay at status quo, what are we going to use the experts for, right? And that is why we as experts should really embrace the proposals, because they're proposals for quite radical and very badly needed change.
Okay, so you're saying there's a sort of fear amongst some of your colleagues that this is I'm just interested in exploring this because
certainly, and I wouldn't want to name names, but it's also true that within, not only we heard earlier that the people on this side X, the people are like almost climate deniers are gonna say that this is not useful. These are not people that are representative. I don't care so much, because most politicians realize in Sweden and in many other countries that we need to move further, faster together. And if we don't realize it, the EU is telling us as a membership country that if we don't live up to the EU demands, it's going to be hugely expensive for us. So most politicians realize we have to do it, and there's a bunch of new proposals on the table. Where I was a little bit surprised to hear sort of a skepticism was from some of the large environmental movements. We're like, yeah, we channel the input from the people, but really, I'm not sure at the end of the day how representative those organizations are. Even if they've got 100,000 members, most citizens are not members. So you will clearly see that there's a bias towards some kind of, or at least there's a perceived bias towards what kind of people would be a member of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, for instance. Whereas there's a much smaller bias. There might still be some sort of bias, let's admit that, but it's going to be much smaller in what you've done compared to what we typically see from an environmental organization. So this is tremendously much better in terms of representativeness than what we typically get from the average environmental NGO.
It is our experience actually within Knoca that it's been really hard to persuade environmental NGOs to take this work seriously. And it's interesting that you're saying that you're going to integrate the kind of things that they've been talking about it, that they were recommending into your work. So many environmental NGOs just kind of ignore this, even though it has potential for taking their agenda forward.
I think it's their loss, but I also think that when we just published our comments on all, certainly a lot of the proposals are not within the transport sector. It's not within our mandate to work with those, but everything that was about the transport sector, with a wide definition of that, we commented on mostly positively, but also we have a discussion about, this might be difficult. This might not be a national level, it might be EU level and so forth. And we did that partially because we wanted to on our own, right? We felt it was relevant to our work. We wanted to dig into it, but also as a sort of a nice, friendly, push, nudge to our dear friends within the big environmental organizations that they should also use this material this way. And we heard earlier today that, this might just live on for two minutes and then we'll move on to something else. And I think we who like what you've been done, it's our responsibility also to, bring the material forward, use it as a backing for our own stuff, and also as a something we can dig into to find new and more proposals. And I really think that is the way that the big environmental NGOs should also use it.
No, I think the question about how you keep proposals from assemblies alive is a really pertinent one. And I think obviously the assembly members themselves can only do so much work. And so I think it's what you're talking about is exactly the kind of role that I think makes sense for civil society organizations. I'm kind of interested. So this was a process that was run by FAIRTRANS, run independently. I'm kind of interested, as someone who's in this space, do you see an opportunity for this being something that is built more formally into climate governance or into transport governance processes, potentially commissioned by government or commissioned by other NGOs or whatever? Do you see more of a role for this in Swedish politics? Is it something you'd like to see more of?
I got so excited I almost started clicking my pen again. Yes, I do. And so I was just prior to this meeting, I answered, I don't even know what it's called in English, but when the government sends out a proposal and registered organizations are invited to give their input. In Swedish, it's remissförfarande. And this remissförfarande, it sort of almost outlived itself, because very many of these organizations represent themselves and themselves only. More and more citizens don't feel that we're necessarily represented by a labor union, a trade union, the church, and so forth. So there's clearly room and probably need for representative democracy to find new ways of prove that we are indeed a representative democracy. And I think the FAIRTRANS really showed a way forward for that. I remember years back, only 2 municipalities of Sweden ever asked their citizens directly, what kind of municipal tax do you want? How high should the tax be and where should the money go? And I went, one of them was Kalix. I went there, I stepped out of the train or the bus, and the first thing I did was to ask 2 young women, so what do you want to do with the local taxation? And they said, well, don't ask us because we're on parental leave. But I insisted asking them, and they knew so much more about how the tax money is spent in Kalix than others because they were asked. So also, as soon as we start asking citizens, not only do we get relevant replies, but we also get citizens who become much more informed. So I think having this sort of institutionalized, not as a one-off project, but as something that whenever there's a big issue, we know that a formal referendum is rarely going to happen. We know that we only vote for our politicians every 4th year, but something similar to the process we've seen here, I think could and should be done much more regularly to educate the people and to give a much better decision, a much better ground for decisions for our representative politicians.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks so much, Mattias. Stay with us because I'm just going to bring in the other 3.
Sure.
I
click my pen meanwhile.
No, you can click it now. Yeah. and also Sofia. Brilliant. I've got to, this may be something I'm going to ask, and you're going, Tim, you're going to say actually bring somebody else in. We had some questions from one of a series of questions around facilitation and how did you support bringing these diverse opinions together. One of the things that Jenny was talking about was that sort of celebration of the diversity, but obviously that's quite difficult to manage. So were there any? Actually, I'll ask Jenny to start with. How were you facilitated to do this? And maybe we'll pull someone in from DigiDem as well. So how I mean, you're in a group. You've got 60 people who have never met each other before. You're all from all different parts of the country, all different perspectives. How were you supported to work together?
Wow, now you're asking me to remember stuff again.
Oh, okay.
Hard for me. No, I'm just kidding. But that was something that was really vital for us, I think, and we got really well taken care of because that's a difficulty when you meet new people, and there's always different types of personas in a group. Some are more laid back, some are more forward, and to get that dynamic within the group can be quite challenging. And I think that was something that was really important because we were given, or we got to actually be there to decide the rules amongst ourselves as well, which was really good because then we could always point back to, hey, we agreed upon this amongst ourselves. So if someone else is talking, then Jenny, shut up. Then that was easy for someone to tell me to just sip it because I agreed to sip it. So that was really, really important that we had that facilitator to actually keep us in line and also move things forward when we got stuck. So that was really good.
Okay, and you didn't feel you felt it was really important to just in order to keep the process going. That makes sense. That makes
for sure.
Sense. Tim, Sofia, and actually Jenny again, I guess Mattias kind of said he'd like to see more of this within the climate governance space, and kind of thought yourselves. Do you have a sense of how you would like to see this in Sweden, that this sort of process be integrated more within climate governance?
I think it's fantastic how the 2030 Secretariat engaged with the results, and in some ways we should have had you guys along as witnesses. But I think in a way it's even better because you've been outside the process, and so
I was disappointed at the time, but right.
And I think that's absolutely fantastic. So really, this is one of the first exchanges that Mattias and I have had. So it really is kind of like an outsider. So I think that's great, and I think we should really pick up on what you started, and also maybe see if other organizations would pitch in on that. That's really good. In terms of institutionalizing it more, I think we have to think about trust and who's involved. And so yesterday I had an email correspondence with the climate spokesman of the populist right-wing party, the Swedish Democrats, trying to encourage them to come along to the seminar tomorrow. And they're understandably really skeptical, because they basically see this as a new strategy of a progressive agenda to try and get their political way forward, because they're not doing so well in the electoral system. And so I think it's really important. I think we've got to take that very seriously. So I think if it was to be institutionalized, it made me think, well, I think we do really need to think about what biases are there in recruitment. We managed to match who people said they would vote for. So we managed to match the proportions in the parliament. I think that was a big part from the legitimacy. But I mean, it doesn't mean that we had 20 people who said they would vote for the Swedish Democrats, but it doesn't mean they were a typical 20 people who voted for the Swedish Democrats. So we're going to be doing some more analysis in more detail about how opinions match. But it would be like, I think if it was to be institutionalized and get kind of more cross-party support, then I think you'd want to try and have it sort of institutionalized in government, where there was cross-party scrutiny of the recruitment strategy and the evidence and things. And that would make it a much more difficult process, but that might be necessary if you wanted to go down that really institutionalization road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sophie, do you have any thoughts at all?
Well, just like more of a personal perspective is that I mean, I'm not a democracy expert by any means, but I would like to see more of these initiatives to sort of complement the development where we are all on platforms constantly, that the algorithms function in a way that they promote very strong feelings and try sort of to divide us. I don't want to do a big speech here, but we're purposely engaged in fear and hate and division and strong feelings of that kind. And perhaps we need to sort of find alternatives or like complements to the current democratic system, to find more unity and to actually meet one another. I mean, in person or online or in this type of meetings, of course, but actually meet each other and listen to each other and have those kind of facilitated deliberations where everyone is heard and gets a voice and everyone's perspective is weighed in, so to speak. So
was that actually part of your, just out of interest, was that part of your communication strategy? Something Kirsten's just put into the chat about, did you actually highlight that kind of multi-partisan nature of the Assembly members?
Yes, very much so. Because there would have been no legitimacy for this Assembly if we didn't also disclose the fact that we try to mirror the Swedish society. And particularly we highlighted the fact that we try to have as much representation or mirroring as possible of the latest parliament election in Sweden.
Okay. And I guess a question for any of you, I've kind of, when I've talked to colleagues in Sweden, there's been a sort of reluctance within sort of Swedish, amongst people within Swedish politics, to think that this sort of process is not necessary, you know, because of the sort of consensual nature of Swedish political culture. How do you respond to that sort of Swedish exceptionalism, if you like? Mattias?
So I'm tend to think about it the other way around, because so the 2030 Secretariat is based on there's 8 parties. One is the right-wing populist that you mentioned, but all the other 7 parties agreed on the same climate targets. And none of them, I know that some of them would disagree, but objectively, none of them have the policies in place to reach the climate target, particularly the 2030 target, which is very tough. Which is why they should all sort of collectively embrace that they now get a citizen's response. I like to think of ourselves as sort of a promise keepers to the politicians. You promise all these great things, you don't know how to get there, we do. And we see that more and more now. Unfortunately, Swedish politics are getting very divisive. It's now very hard to get those. We used to get all these 7 parties together and sit down around the table and discuss how we're going to get there.
That was actually the sort of stereotype we have of Sweden.
Yeah, it doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen anymore. I think we're lucky if we can get one side of the aisle together. Both sides have problems within their sort of semi-constellations as well. But given that there's no party has an answer to this, I think they should all really embrace, well, here's a wide approach, citizen answer to the challenges that you face. And I think that for a while the current government was sort of, to be diplomatic, less interested in reaching the Swedish climate targets. But now the EU says, well, we're going to fine you, in fact, probably billions of euros if you don't meet the target. So now there's a renewed interest, and if there's a whole catalog of proposals, it should be in everyone's interest to have a long, hard look at them.
Okay. And your feeling with that is that this sort of process can break some of those sort of deadlocks that are there at the moment. Is that your thought?
It's not necessarily a thought, but it's certainly a hope. And I know that a lot of other ways we tried to break that deadlock has not been successful. So we really sometimes just gotta grab at whatever we have that might be useful. Okay.
I'm just looking at another question we've got here. It was a very specific question about dropout rates. So that people always ask that one. Tim, did you have issues with dropout, and if so, were there specific people who didn't?
Can help to answer this, but I think it's a really important point. Yeah, we had 58 started, so 2 people were ill on the day, so they missed getting on the train at the start, and we had 49 who voted. So it was yeah.
Do you have any sense
online in a video call? And perhaps it's a bit difficult to know about that process, but I think we were very ambitious in trying to recruit people also who didn't have Swedish as a first language, and we didn't have enough resources to have proper professional interpretation. I mean, it was just so expensive. It would have been the cost of 11 other members, I think we calculated at one point, and we tried to support those people having multilingual materials in the climate fresk, and we had sort of volunteer language help, and in some cases those people stayed with and it worked, but in some cases some of those people dropped off, unfortunately. So I don't know if that's a fair Digidem. Anna, I don't know, you were actually handling this. This was
okay, so it was outside of your right. Okay. So just one question which I'll end with, actually. It's very specific to you, Jenny, which is does anything come to mind about how you were able to deal with this kind of what was a very chaotic process? How did you? It's a very, very specific question, but I quite like it. How did you find that calm in the madness of it all?
Wow, I don't know if I ever did, to be honest. So no, but I think it's always about looking back at yourself. I mean, you know yourself the best, and that's what you have to start from and end with in so many cases. That what's important to me, what's my motivation, why did I agree to this madness in the first place? What can I actually for myself take with me moving forward, no matter where I end up in life. So it was more like just seeing it as no matter what comes of it, it's an experience that's unlike anything else I've ever experienced before. So looking at it like that, and also meeting a lot of really, really nice people and just having a laugh but we danced a lot. That was crazy. Tim, you remember?
You danced a lot.
Yeah, or semi a lot. Well, it was really, really nice. It was so diverse. It was so, I mean, yeah, we were truly, truly a miniature Sweden. And right. That was, and we even though we never got to speak to every single assembly member, you found that connection with them somehow.
It's just so powerful in our the sort of state of politics at the moment, that is actually possible. Because you listen to some people, that is not possible. It seems as though that's not possible. So that's a really that's a really heartwarming kind of thought about how politics could be, which is really, really important. And actually, of course, this is one of the things we're doing here, is modeling how politics and climate politics could be. So that's really fantastic. Thank you. So we're just coming to the end. So what I'd like to do is just ask you each is sort of, what's been your takeaway? What's the thing that you're taking away from this, from this experience, from this assembly, from the process? And maybe I'll start with you, Sofia. What's your key takeaway from this whole kind of your experience of engaging with the assembly?
I would say that it is possible to agree on important stuff that are hard to agree on. That it is possible, and if it's possible for these fantastic members, it is possible on a larger scale as well. Okay,
that's nice. Mattias, what do you take away from this process?
I obviously am not happy that Trump is reelected, or that the COP meeting went so badly, which means that processes like this are even more important to give us hope that there is indeed a way forward. So I want this to be the new normal. I'm excited about hopefully being a part of the process next time.
Okay. Tim? Apart from needing to have more sleep.
Yeah, that would be nice. But yeah, I think that one of the sort of stuff that Jenny was talking about at the end, which surprised me, the feeling in the room. Digidem had us all standing in a circle and passed around the mic amongst all members, all experts, all the politicians who were there, the organizers, and the number of times that these kind of feelings of kind of hope or joy. I mean, we were there dealing with a really difficult. We spent 40 hours talking about this really challenging, difficult question of climate and Sweden's emissions, but the experience of interacting and deliberating across these boundaries in society just seems to be something that we have a kind of innate feeling for, and I think there is a power in that intangible kind of spirit that you get out of it. And I don't know quite how we harvest that, but I think that's something worth looking more into, and certainly something that I'll always take with me from the process.
And you mentioned Digidem Lab a couple of times. I just want to shout out to them because they've been so kind answering some of the questions in the chat, and clearly played an enormous role on this. We always limited on the amount of people we can have in these conversations, but I just want to say it sounds like you did a fantastic job. Both from the organizers and the participants love you. So what can I say? You can't ask for any more than that. So final word to you, Jenny. What do you take away from this? I mean, you've said a lot already, but I'm just interested. When you look back, what do you take away?
Well, I think the biggest, I mean, this was a crazy, I don't know if I call it an experiment or whatever it was, but it was just so clear that we have so much more in common with each other than what we have that puts us or polarizes or drives us apart. And I think that's the main thing that I will take with me from this assembly, because it became so apparent that even if we disagree on certain things, we had so much more in common, which made us able to talk to each other on a level where we saw each other as equals. And I think that's such a big thing in today's society that people tend to forget. It's just shouting and disagreements, and focuses on who is disagreeing with who, instead of like, okay, can we find common ground and work from there? So that was pretty cool to see that could actually be. It wasn't even difficult to make that happen. It was quite simple.
Well, you don't know how much running they're doing underneath the Digidem Lab are doing in order to.
Yeah, of course, but it was. I think it's just when people come together, we find ourselves, we find each other much easier than we do in front of screens or get twisted and tangled into algorithms and whatever. So I think we need to just physically meet each other and talk to each other and just see each other.
Well said. Thank you. That's really great. Listen, I'd like to thank Tim and Sofia and Mattias and Jenny and all the other people involved in what sounds like a fantastic project, DigiDem Lab and others. As Tim rightly said, the impact of these things is really hard to judge this so soon. I mean, people want immediate results, but it actually takes a while. So we will keep coming back and finding out how things are going in Sweden, learning more, especially as you will be using this as part of a research project. I think that there's a lot for us to learn. I'm always kind of really inspired by hearing people not just directly organizing, but had actually participated as well. So thank you for that. We're now going to be quite quiet until Christmas, but we are going to release the final draft of our impact evaluation framework. Many of you within the Knoca community have been helping us develop that. We're on to the second version of that, and that should be released in December. And there will be a launch event for that on January the 16th. That will be our first event after Christmas. For those of you who do such things, enjoy your Christmas. For those of you who are just taking a break, enjoy your break. It's been a real pleasure, and it's always, as I say, a real honor to hear from people who have directly participated. So once again, thanks for taking part in the Knoca workshop, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.